Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jackie Zahner. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live. We're just going to give folks a minute or two or 30 seconds to join us here today. I hope your fall is off to a wonderful start. I will anchor myself right now, and where I'm calling in from today, this morning, is from Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, where I've been spending my summer. We have an orchard up here in Canada, and we're just about to pick our Honeycrisp apples, which are about as big as my head. You might not know a fun fact about me is I'm Farmer Jackie in the summer. So a big greeting to you. Well, I'd love to get started. This is both a live conversation and it will also be recorded. So if you're watching this on playback, thank you for watching and for joining us for this amazing conversation. So once again, I am Jackie Zahner, and I am the founder of a company called She Money, whose mission is to advance women's financial agency and wellness. Also have the She Money newsletter here on LinkedIn, which I encourage you to subscribe to, and you will also see it from the chat. And yes, please, if you're joining, please feel free to say hello in the chat, post comments or questions throughout this discussion, and we'll do our best to get to them. And I'm insanely excited today for the conversation that we are going to have with one of my favorite people on the planet, Chantel Chapman, the founder of The Trauma of Money and the author of a soon-to-be released book in the same name. My ask of you today, and we're going to pop it right up on the screen, if you are watching this or watching on replay, is for you to buy this book, encourage others to buy this book, create a book group around this book, which I intend to also do, because I guarantee this will be the best investment in your financial future that you could ever make. I would also like to announce up front, and we will circle again in the back, that She Money is partnering with The Trauma of Money on a lot of different offerings. Why? Well, you'll hear all about it as we go through the conversation today. Chantel's work, I'll tell you more about that in a second, but feel free to scan the QR code, and we will also come back to it at the end of the conversation. I think you will find, as I have, that this book, The Trauma of Money, fills a gap that few have recognized, the gap between financial education and trauma recovery, and is relevant for everyone that wants to shift their relationship to money in a positive way. About 2 years ago, a friend of mine who might be on this call, Sui Lang Pinoke, told me about this course, an 18-week program called The Trauma of Money. And I signed up immediately for both personal and professional reasons. On a personal level, I recognized for myself that despite having an abundance of financial resources and high levels of financial fluency, I was still struggling on so many fronts when it came to my money, including an irrational fear of not having enough, about being old, about being poor. And on the other side, how to unleash my own generosity. On a professional level, I am continually searching for insights that can support people on their journey to financial wellness. And I would say that true insights, true innovation, truly helpful content that can do just that is very hard to find. But I found all that and more with the woman you are about to meet, her incredible team of teachers and facilitators that I've had the privilege of get to know and work with. I love making predictions, and I love it even more when those predictions come true. My prediction is that Chantel Chapman will be globally recognized for her incredible contribution to the field, and most importantly, be the reason that so many people finally have an understanding and the tools they need to bring more financial peace and abundance into their lives. Please welcome to this live stage, Chantel Chapman. Hi, Chantel.
Wow, Jackie, what an introduction. I felt myself getting emotional there. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I purposely didn't send it to you, my friend, because I wanted it to be a surprise. And I meant every word of it, Chantel. Meeting you has been, sometimes you just say thank you to the universe that it's listening to you and inviting to you the people that can truly support you on your journey in life and around your mission. And you are one of those people. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. The feeling is so mutual.
Well, and I know before we start, you want to locate yourself? I think you're in Vancouver today. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Vancouver in Chawasan on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Kwantlen, and Tsawwassen people.
Well, I welcome two people from Canada having this global conversation. I love that. So let's start off, Chantel, with what really led you to do this work. I know your book is coming out. You share a lot of your personal story in this book, but give us a little background to what anchored you, and of course, the work that you started, many years ago called The Trauma of Money.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I have a finance background. I had a career working in finance, particularly in financial education, financial literacy education. And even though I was often quoted in the media giving financial advice and educating in that way, I had a lot of behaviors around money that were the opposite of what I was teaching. And it was through a personal experience that I had gone through that made me start to question what I was doing. Is what I was teaching not helping, or am I a fraud? And so many emotions came up around that. And I know that many financial professionals experience this where, they're a financial professional and then they don't feel like they're perfect with money. And it can bring up a lot. So I had started to explore. I'm a very curious person, and I have a skill of pattern recognition, and that is a result of being diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But I started to identify like what is actually impacting my relationship with money, because it wasn't just the financial literacy. I was teaching that. I knew that in and out. And that took me on a deep exploration to try and understand what are some of the sources of the narratives and beliefs I have around money. I started going down the path of my own trauma healing journey. And I had noticed right away that many trauma therapists are not trained in anything to do specifically with money. And when I would bring up money, this response would be like, oh, that's kind of out of scope. Or they would tell me, like, you should try budgeting or willpower. And I just was like, I know how to budget. It's not working. And and so that led me on this like solo research journey, and I started exploring different areas, different modalities like addiction recovery, trauma, neuroanatomy of trauma. I did some training with different neuroscientists. I did some training with many thought leaders in the trauma space, and it still wasn't feeling enough for me. There was like a missing piece. And then I started exploring community economic development and trying to understand more about the economic system that we live in, the creation of that system, the history of that system. And as I was putting all these pieces together, I could see the patterns of the history, these layers, and our responses that many people have with money. And I decided about 6.5 years ago to start testing like this content that I had put together. So we tested our first cohort. I pulled together 5 faculty members in our first cohort, and now we're coming into cohort 13. We have 25 faculty members. So we've grown significantly, but the essence of the pathway was my own experience around trauma, healing from trauma, and how that impacted my relationship with money.
Well, and having experienced your program, I will say it's like nothing I could have ever really imagined, and yet everything I would have hoped or dreamed for, in that way. And you speak in how you shared your story when you were seeking counsel. What showed up for me, and certainly shows up through the course, which I want to give you a high level overview of the Tom method, is that all the stuff that actually comes before any financial education, or the term I really don't like, financial literacy, that it's really addressing, what happens, all before you show up to make that decision. You take in that information, or you do the next thing when it comes to your money. And your journey just speaks to where so much great, not just content, but where people who truly are innovative come from, at that deep place of personal experience and curiosity. And it just shows up in how I have experienced the course. And of course, and I want to dive into that, but right up front, you did create this course. We're going to talk more about, the content behind it, but who did you write this book for? Who's the audience for this book in your view?
Yeah, I mean, that was a question I explored deeply with my publisher, Wiley. And, originally we wanted to write the book for mental health professionals and finance professionals. But as I was going on the journey of writing the book, I was like, this is for anybody that interacts with money and people. And so
That's everybody. That's everybody.
everybody. And what's really fascinating is I recently looked at where our students are coming from in trauma of money, and we have people showing up from 22 different countries. And that just goes to show that like this experience of trauma around money is a global experience, no matter where you live. And so our work has been resonating with a lot of different people, folks who work in economic justice, finance professionals, mental health professionals, or anyone that has a relationship with money, which is everybody.
Yeah. And I would say, having sort of gone through it twice, people come from all those backgrounds and more, some from a very deeply personal place as well as a professional place. And I think, as you said, I've heard you say you want, and ideally, therapists to be trained in money and financial professionals to be trained in trauma, like a trauma approached engagement, right, around money. It's just like when I heard that for the first time, I'm like, yes, that makes sense. So let's jump into a little bit. And this is a robust book. It is a dense book. There is so much in there. When I was trying to prep for this call and having also taken the course, I'm like, man, I just need to sit with some of these statements and comments. So I will say, there is no way we're going to do this book justice in the course of an hour conversation, but we were going to really try. So you talked about sort of the Tom method. And so the book is based on the Tom method. Can you give a high level overview of what that is? What are the fundamental sort of beliefs or premises from which this training is geared towards? Very high level. Then we're going to, dig into a couple of the pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually didn't create the Tom method until I think cohort 4 or 5. So it was a few years into running the trauma of money certification. And one of the reasons why we created the method is because one layer of programming that we get from the dominant economic system that we live in is we need steps and takeaways and concrete action steps. And so I'm like, okay, we really need something that's like tangible that people can hold on to for when they have like a activation around money. And so this kind of like inspired the creation of the 6-step method. So the Tom method is 6 steps that people can use for working through their entire relationship with money, or they can use the 6 steps for like a one-off financial decision. And it can be used in so many different ways. For example, let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're about to set your pricing for a new offer, and you're noticing that you're kind of like moving in this space where you're wanting to maybe undercharge a bit. You could take the 6 steps and you can work through the steps to prep you to set your pricing for your offer. You could go through the steps with a therapist, with a trauma of money certified therapist, and use those 6 steps over a whole year and work through them at each layer. So these 6 steps take into consideration everything that is leading to a response that we have around money, which includes like the acknowledgement of the nervous system, what's happening to the brain, how when we get activated in a trauma response, there's often like an urgency in how we respond, because we're responding not from cognitive choice, we're responding from a place of survival, and survival requires urgency. And so what the Tom method does is it kind of creates that spaciousness between the activation and your reaction. And it allows you to be like, okay, how can I make a choice, a cognitive choice, or like a full body yes choice around money that has agency, and it's not from like a survival response. And so much of the book and so much of our course is more of like prepping you to work through the method near the end, because there's a lot of like education and psychoeducation that needs to happen around like, what is trauma, what's the nervous system, what are some of the sources of shame that I might have around money, how can I depersonalize that, what are some tools that I can use in step one of the method. And so what we do in the book and in the course is we present multiple ways of being around like healing trauma or being with money. So when you do go through the steps, you can do it in kind of a non-prescriptive way, and you have a lot of like points of reference to choose how you're going to walk through those steps.
Yeah. And I will say, having experienced it, the framework is so powerful at the individual, what's happening to me in this moment, as well as bigger. And just to be clear, like, and maybe I should have started with this. We know that money in some ways is I mean, it's an absolute essential, right? You need it to buy the things, to live, to survive, to thrive. It's like water in our system, right? It's like the air we breathe. And I feel like that's part of what was the pivot for me when I was exposed to your work. I mean, we kind of know that, and yet there's not that bridge between seeing it, and this is work we've done at She Money too, around financial wellness, is seeing money as not only its own separate category of wellness. Do I have enough? Do I have the tools to make thoughtful decisions? But how integral it is to all aspects of our wellness, not just having the resources to do, but in your point, having that cognitive choice to have both enough and be able to make decisions that affect all aspects of your wellness, because almost all of them have financial cost
Yeah.
or a potential financial opportunity. So seeing, sometimes, especially my mom, she goes like, you overthink things, Jackie, like you like make too much of it. And I'm like, no, Mom. I mean, it's almost the opposite. And I would never use the term overthinking in this context, but by understanding how important money is for your life. It is one of, just like your physical health, it's so your relationship is so integral to your overall wellness. So let's talk about that just for a minute. I'm going to jump out of order, because give us some facts, Chantel, about the state of financial wellness, that you've experienced, and how you would even think about that term. And why do you sort of said it in the personal context, but I've read so many books, including one recently called Financial Literacy for All by John Hope Bryant, who said, he says literacy, I a little bit to that term, is the civil rights issue of our time. So set a bit of context before we dive into some of these details about why this matters so much and is applicable to everyone.
Yeah, so we developed the trauma of money map, and these are the 6 layers that we believe impact the relationship with money. And I'll just go through them. So the first is generational trauma or scarcity. Mm-hmm. We always say trauma or scarcity because when the brain believes it's in a state of scarcity, it has a similar response as a trauma response. Mm-hmm. So generational trauma or scarcity, relational trauma or scarcity, societal trauma or scarcity, systemic trauma or scarcity. Our 5th layer we call laws of nature or biomimicry. And this is just a reminder of like choosing frameworks for your to be your like mentor framework for how you want to show up with money in systems that are not rooted in scarcity. And we have so many examples in nature through biomimicry that we can see. And then our last layer is financial education or financial literacy. So financial literacy and financial education is very important. However, we believe it has to come after addressing the trauma response and the scarcity. Because if it doesn't, financial literacy can actually do more harm than good. And I think about this.
That could be like a mic drop right there.
Yes.
For no one, I've never heard anyone say that but you.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've seen it. Like, I've seen it play out when we get hired by organizations working in poverty reduction, and they hire us and they say, design a financial literacy program for this community that's facing poverty. And we always go back and we say, we will not do that. We will actually design this instead. Because the thing is when you have someone who's experiencing scarcity or a trauma response, and you pile on financial literacy, all that's going to do is create shame and overwhelm their bandwidth. And we know through the psychology of scarcity, when someone has an overwhelmed bandwidth, they're more likely to act out on temptation. They're more likely to not follow their budget. And then also, the thing is people experiencing financial distress, they know how to budget because they're stretching a dollar. They're in constant trade-off thinking in their minds. And we have all these stereotypes around like intelligence and like willpower and laziness that actually don't take into consideration how trauma impacts folks and how the psychology of scarcity impacts folks. So this is why I believe, yeah, financial literacy is important, but it has to come after. Like we have to prepare the nervous system. We have to put out the immediate fires. Like if someone's starving and hungry, you're going to overwhelm them with like how to do a budget. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. And I think I address this in the book of like how much money has been spent on financial literacy initiatives. And the average person knows spend less money than I make. The average person knows save for retirement. That's not, the knowing is not the hurdle for them. There's other stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think that's what so deeply resonated with me, Chantel, because what we see, and this is at all wealth levels, I say too, like people with less financial resources are likely even better with money. And I hate the judgmental, bad, worse, good, bad, what all that. But because they have to be, where if you have a lot of financial resources, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can not care, and it does not impact your financial well-being. So even this belief that people with less money are bad with money is just not true. It's probably in fact the opposite. But I think it speaks to the other thing we're talking about, which is, just trying to put a Band-Aid, on a gaping wound without going up and saying what's causing the gaping wound, which is in part that wages have not kept pace with inflation and the cost of assets, the cost of living. More and more people are living in a constant state of overwhelm, just period, and financial and economic overwhelm because the American dream is now out of reach. I mean, this is a big part of the narrative. And even and we're hearing more and more, we're unsustainable path is the richest country in the world. Our debt is unsustainable. So your framework invites sort of this more expansive thinking and does present this, which it is, as an urgent public health issue. Mm-hmm. This isn't just a nice to have. This is an absolute essential to have, not just hitting people with, 10 steps to budgeting or, should you buy an ETF or the trade-offs with different retirement plans, but addressing these systemic issues related to there not being enough, and in fact, a more scarcity, which arguably is even going to get bigger in the context of what we're seeing now with, job losses, et cetera, high levels of debt. So I just wanted to bring that out because I could not, your approach is unique. What you say is different. And I think that's why we're so excited about sharing what you're talking about, because it's you're going upstream and people don't want to do that. They just want to, put the Band-Aid on the wound without addressing why the wound was there in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, one question I would put forward is, how does it benefit the economic system to invest in the narrative that financial literacy will help and perpetuate the idea that if you're experiencing financial distress in this economic system, this is a personal failing? Yeah. Like, question that. It's what's happening is it's like reducing the burden of responsibility on the system and placing it on the individual. And financial literacy initiatives are perpetuating that pathway.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yes, please. I see it. So part of what, obviously, this is for everyone. And to be clear, we're also saying which is true in how I opened it, you can use this book regardless of your level of financial resources. This isn't about just not having enough. This is about the multiple ways money shows up in our lives and is used as a power tool, has been used for the entire history. If you're certain populations, in intergenerational context. So bring that forward a little bit for us and sort of nuance what you sort of differentiate between financial trauma and the trauma of money.
Yeah. So we always orient the trauma of money by defining what financial trauma is. So financial trauma in the world of financial psychology is defined as a trauma that happens because of something specifically to do with money. So this would be inability to retire, a divorce, and like maybe financial manipulation, financial abuse, poverty, chronic financial distress for more than 3 months, sudden job loss, sudden loss of assets. So something happened with money. It caused a rupture in the nervous system. And now your brain, in order to protect you, is going to have a response anytime you engage in something similar in the future. That's just how our brain works. Now, that's financial trauma. And when we were putting together the trauma of money curriculum, we were looking at this and we were like, this doesn't fully like encompass all the experiences that we're kind of noticing. Like, even for me, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. We know that it's documented that 1 in 3 women are. And that experience, that trauma, I would say is one of the biggest traumatic experiences that showed up in my relationship with money as a woman. And so that was not included in the financial trauma definition, because the original trauma didn't have anything to do with money. It had to do with power dynamics and abuse. But because of that experience, the way I was showing up with money was like I had no boundaries. I was like pleasing and appeasing oppressors. And then I also didn't want to be an oppressor or an abuser. So I would overgive all the time. And so this is just like one example of a trauma that's the original trauma is not money related, but it shows up in your relationship with money. And this is why we decided to use the language trauma of money and introduce that map. And we talk about 4 sources of trauma that we believe can significantly impact the relationship with money. So generational trauma, relational trauma. So this might be like trauma experienced in your childhood, like attachment trauma. This can also be abuse or other forms of a trauma between people, societal trauma, and systemic trauma. So while the original trauma may not be specifically money related, it can impact the relationship with money. Why? Well, to simply put, trauma is something that happens that impacts your sense of safety, security, and worthiness. What does money represent in our society? Security and worthiness. So if I have wounding around security and worthiness, of course, the thing that represents security and worthiness is going to be impacted.
Yeah, and while you take a sip of water, and that's another like mic drop, because we want to separate this. And this is again this theory of like money, you're connected to your overall wellness in ways that we're just beginning to unpack, and how you associate this with women. Because if and I've talked to a lot of survivors. In fact, just last week I was back in Utah and I was at the fundraiser for the YWCA, which is a safe house for women leaving domestic violence situations. Talk about economic impact. It's where the rubber hits the road when you're making that decision to leave a relationship because of abuse. Do you have enough money? Do you have emergency savings? Do you have things in your own name? Where do you go? Do you even have a car? Do you know? And usually, oftentimes in that situation, right, that money has been used as a manipulation tool all along to control you. So, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's like the gift and the curse in some ways. Thank you, Chantel, for both of this lens, because especially for those populations, including, in the US, I'll speak to that in particular because I've done a lot of work, looking into the racial wealth gap. And so to say that's just financial literacy when not that long ago people were actually property is to not see how this shows up. And we know it shows up in the trauma world with epigenetics, and to not make that connection to financial implications, especially for those people experiencing, and then worse, to be gaslit about it, to be told that we're over that with now, is so deeply. I mean, it's like for women too that experience sexual violence. Shouldn't you just be over that? Like, should that still show up? So this trauma informed approach is what's revolutionary to me in your work.
Yeah, it has to be, because it just lives in your body. The generational trauma, the trauma, it's going to show up and it's going to influence decisions,
Yeah, absolutely. And one book you mentioned, and in your book, you mentioned so many amazing thought leaders, not just thought leaders, like doctors, practitioners, neuroscientists. Your Body Keeps Score is one of my favorite books. You talk a lot about Gabor Mate's work, if I'm pronouncing his name right, The Myth of Normal, and so many other practitioners, and you bring it together with the financial lens, which is, again, I think the incredible innovation. So I want to.
That's
there's so much
gifts of my trauma. So that's one
Pardon
of the
me?
Gifts, that's one of the gifts of my own trauma, is the pattern recognition.
Yes. And again, that's why I love you so much. But you do bring in, we're going to get practical in a minute, but I just want to just spend a couple more minutes on how much time you spend talking about trauma in the book, defining it, and then connecting it into this, which you've already touched on, shame. And I'm also obsessed with the work of Brene Brown. She just came out with a new book that I can't wait to read as well. But the tagline of Tom is if that's appropriate, mission, I don't know if that's the right term, decrease shame and increase discernment. So let's go a little bit more into this connection into financial shame and trauma. And then we're kind of going to start to bring forth some of the other, like how you start to see it and what becomes the process of actually engaging with this so that you do see behavior change.
Yeah, so we find it's really important to define the word trauma, because sometimes people will over-identify with trauma, or they don't identify with trauma when it is trauma. And there's a lot of opinions about like what trauma is and what trauma is not. So one of the things that I did in the book is I gave multiple examples, multiple definitions of trauma from different trauma experts. Like Gabor Mate says, trauma is not what happened to you, but what happens inside of you. Resmaa Menakem says trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. It's a highly effective tool of safety and survival. Trauma is also not an event. Trauma is the body's protective response to an event or a series of events that it perceives potentially dangerous. This perception may be accurate, inaccurate, or entirely imaginary. Trauma is also a wordless story our body tells itself about what is safe and what is a threat. And so one of the points that I wanted to get across is that trauma is not like an event that like the group decides is traumatic. It's more about the individual's experience of something and what happens to the body and brain in that experience. And this is different for everyone. But if you notice that you have an experience, and then anytime you encounter something similar, and you all of a sudden have like a nervous system response that has you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that's maybe an indicator that was a traumatic experience for you. So again, kind of linking to the decreased shame, increased discernment, which is our tagline, and it's also the artwork on my wall.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I just noticed that. Sorry.
Yeah. So we feel that this approach to working with your relationship with money of decreasing shame and increasing discernment is key. And so the more we understand what trauma is, the more we can be discerning about a response or an experience that we have, and we have the agency to identify as was that traumatic or not. And the more discerning we can be, the more our shame naturally drops. The more we drop our shame, it opens up a world of being more discerning. So these are like levers, and we can go at it from either angle. And so in the trauma of money, we always start, like, our foundational teachings are always about financial shame first. What is financial shame? What is it doing to the brain and the body? And what type of money behaviors manifest because of financial shame, and then how to work with it. And what we've found in our research is that shame feels like the threat of abandonment, and it's a very painful experience, and it makes us feel isolated and alone, like we're the only ones who have experienced it. And the opposite of shame is acceptance and belonging. And when we collect information about, like, how some behaviors we have around money is actually a trauma response, this not only increases our discernment, but it also makes us feel like we're accepted and we belong. Oh, this isn't just a personal failing. Oh, this is a natural response when my brain and nervous system feel unsafe. And so this is why this, like, decreased shame, increased discernment piece is so fundamental to everything that we teach.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, we talk a lot about reducing the burden of responsibility on the individual and placing it on the system. And sometimes we get some criticism about that approach. Like, oh, if you do that, no one's going to take any personal responsibility, and, like, they're just going to be a victim to the system, and they're not going to improve their situation. We've actually found the opposite to happen. The more someone decreases shame and depersonalizes shame and depersonalizes their trauma responses and moves out of thinking it's a personal failing, the more they have motivation to take agency and change their experience if they have the ability to do so.
I mean, that's such another mic drop, Chantel. Like, and this is why I love you so much. And I can't wait for this book to get out there, because we do tend to, in this rugged individualist society, put everything on the individual. If you just worked harder, if you just pulled up your bootstraps, which completely diminishes historical context, the intergenerational piece we talked about, and personal experience, where especially those that have experienced trauma, big T, from all the various forms of abuse that isn't just personal, but systemic, related to identities, right, that we started to talk about. And I just want to name too why I think this work just so crosses wealth levels. And you and I are going to be creating a program together, we'll tell you about it later, that is targeted for high net wealth women with net worths of over $10 million. And that sounds exclusive, but also in some ways importantly exclusive, and there are other ways to access. But what I found as a co-founder of Women Moving Millions and working with ultra high net worth women that could afford to make $1 million philanthropic gifts to nonprofit organizations was extreme levels of this. Mm-hmm. And by this, I meant how they came to their wealth, what society was telling them to do with their wealth. Could they still live a nice lifestyle, and also something else? What happened when they showed up in power? What does that power even look like? Were they mimicking the power of sort of men in their lives and how they were using their wealth? When they mimicked that, they were shamed for it. There's so much to unpack. And part of what I hope to do in partnership with you in this work is unleash money, right? If money is like water, like energy, I think what keeps people, including myself, and I name this up front, holding too tightly to wealth is fear, right? And shame. Why do I have so much? I didn't really deserve it. A teacher makes this. I worked on Wall Street in age 30, made $1 million a year. That wasn't right, let alone how I made it. And, men are celebrated, but are women. Like, you have all these stories and narratives that leave you in a place of confusion, fear, and shame that keeps things too tight. And I think especially, and it's not the only population, but a population that I really care about, working with because of the trend of the feminization of wealth, which is its own topic, and I'm writing about that soon, is how do we unleash those resources, unlock them? I don't know if I like the word unleash. And that will come, to your point, when people feel they have agency.
Mhm.
And that's the word that we use at She Money too. We use wellness and agency. And I know that's a word you use a lot as well.
Yeah, and when you were going through that list of the experience of the woman who holds a lot of financial wealth and trying to decide what to do with it, all I could think about was analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
You're carrying all this shame and guilt about the money, and you really want to do good with that money. You really want to use that money in a good way. And also think about the layer of like, women couldn't access a credit card without a male cosigner not that long ago. So there is an embedded narrative on the subconscious that many women carry, that I don't know if I could be trusted with money. Will I make the right decision?
Yeah.
Right? And so this leads to almost this like perfectionism expectation. And we've created this model called the compounding financial shame cycle that starts with perfectionism. Perfectionism leads to procrastination, which leads to paralysis. And within this model is like shame, a fear of being shunned or making the wrong choice. And in the state of the procrastination, that's where we might reach out to something to soothe the nervous system. And then we move into a place of financial avoidance, and then we shame ourselves for being in that situation. And it's this like ongoing cycle.
Yes, like just mic drop every single minute. And you were speaking to me, and I hope speaking to so many people. And you said something, and I'll move past shame because and please feel free. I know some of you are posting questions. We'll try to answer them as best we can. But also, one thing you said, which I like, I kind of, on this on my virtual copy of the book, shame dies in community.
Yes.
And that is the other intervention, which we are trying to create here at She Money, why we're working together, is that the journey to be financially healthy and wealthy is not an individual journey. It's a journey best traveled together. And in fact, just announcing, I too am working on a book, which will come out hopefully October 6th of next year. And this is a big theme of my book, is the idea that, that we need to pull money, our journey with money, our ability, and using how we use our money into community. So say one word, and I know Brene Brown talks about this, and again, that connection. My dream would be to interview you and Brene Brown together at our next She Money Summit. I'm just going to name that if and when my book comes out. I'm just going to like name that, because if that happens, like, thank you to the universe, Mother Universe. But talk for a minute about what you mean by that shame dies in community. And I think it's connected into what you said about belonging, but I'd still love you to make the point.
Yeah. So shame feels like the threat of abandonment, and it's an extremely isolated feeling. And the opposite of shame in psychology, they would call it prosocial. I mean, it's just acceptance and belonging. And we find that, what I've observed from running Trauma of Money, and we usually have about 200 students a cohort, which I love, because the more students are there, the more we create experiences of shame dying. And, when you can be in a group and you can be like, I feel like this around money. And then you look around and there's like 30 other people that are like me too. That individual, like I'm the only one experiencing it narrative, it can't exist. It can't exist. And now that threat of abandonment is minimized. And, one thing that's really inspired my teachings around financial shame is the 12-step recovery community. And I think about that space, and that whole model is built on shame dies in community. You go to a meeting, you share in a meeting with a whole room of people, something that you probably feel a lot of shame about. And what happens after you share is people in the room say to you, thank you, keep coming back, you're worth it. And then all of a sudden, like you feel connected. And it's so powerful on the path of recovery. And so it was really important in the trauma of money for us to bring that aspect in to the spaces we run. Even the way we wrote the book, like I tried to feature as many people as possible so you can hear from so many different experiences, because not everyone's going to relate to me and my experience. And there's so many different experiences around money. So that was because our goal is to help folks decrease shame and feel that sense of connection and belonging.
Yeah. And one thing I just relate to that so much, and we've talked about this, Chantel, but having, and we're going to do this when we do it together, I think, is have people say the worst thing, like that secret that if everyone knew, they would never want to talk to you again, right? As
Yeah.
it relates to money. And I have so many of those, and people look at me like I've got it all figured out. And I do have a lot figured out, but there's a lot I don't. There are things I haven't done. And I often ask people, especially when they say I'm bad with money, to say, what's the evidence of that? But also, once you release the thing that you're holding the tightest, we know what that feels like. We know when we finally feel safe enough to share our deepest, darkest secret, what that does. And I do think, I have a theory too, and this is for another day, but I'm going to just say it out loud, that a lot of the autoimmune diseases that are going through our culture and society, especially in certain demographics, have a lot to related to this. What's internalized? What is the shame? What are we holding on? So, and a lot of what I've seen in communities of high net wealth is I might have it, but I don't have agency over it. People think I'm rich, but I'm not. I do these things, but I'm getting my beat up in the background, and there are wonderful stories too. Not everyone is experiencing this, but it is more often than not that those are the stories you hear. It's not like a great news. I'm the best with money. I'm completely free. I have total agency. I've got it. Abundance. Like if you look around, you're like, who really do we think ever lives like that? So the shame piece and the part of community and money and shame is just like, whoa.
Yeah.
This is the innovation, but you need a safe space. And that's what I know you provide for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting that you say about the autoimmune. There is like research around that. And in Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, and I also quote this in my book, they say that there's a list of traits that have been associated across all autoimmune diseases. And essentially, this list of traits is like suppression of anger, people pleasing, overdevelop responsibility for others. It's essentially like not being in authenticity with yourself in order to seek attachment.
Well, and again, this is a public health issue, and the public health issue is not the lack of financial education, it's the lack of this. So let's just snap to that. So you are so careful, thoughtful, nuanced, as we're witnessing throughout this whole conversation today, about how you describe things. And you don't label things in traditional ways. For example, money disorders. Instead, you use the term money disruptions as a way to expand the context for each financial behavior's root cause. Can you sort of talk about that? Because this is the part, I got goosies just saying this out loud, and how you nuance things and how they're not just in one bucket. And to me, that was liberating. It was illuminating. It invited, just curiosity and examination. And it's sort of this idea that a lot of them are rooted, whether you have less resources or a lot of resources. So talk about how you came up with this framework, which I think is unique to the trauma of money.
Yeah. So in the world of financial psychology, they've identified certain behaviors that people may have in a pattern around money that are not helpful to their financial situation. And they've started labeling these as money disorders. So like a compulsive shopper, for example. And the language never sat well with me because when I hear the word disorder, it implies that there's something inherently like wrong with you as an individual. And it wasn't really like taking into consideration the environment in which that person is like acting out on those behaviors. And so in order to be like truly trauma informed, we didn't feel like it was right to use that language. because it just led to shame. And it went back to that personal responsibility only lens, which is, we just don't believe like it's true. So for example, in the experience of compulsive shopping, if someone is a compulsive shopper, they're most likely seeking dopamine. Maybe they have a low dopamine state because they're neurodivergent. Maybe they have a low dopamine state because they've just experienced a lot of grief because of loss in their lifetime. Maybe they have a low dopamine state because they're constantly on TikTok and immersed in like consumerism propaganda, and it's depleting their dopamine state. So are we going to label them disordered as a shopping addict, or are we going to address the root? And this is one of the quotes I love from Gabor Mate, is like, when he talks about addiction, if we focus on the secondary problem, which is like the manifestation of behavior, and ignore the primary problem, we're not going to get anywhere. And so I was working with Dr. Joy, who is a psychologist and one of our incredible faculty members who's featured in the book multiple times. And she was like, why don't we use the word disruption? Because when someone shows up with a behavior around money, whether it be financial avoidance, overspending, underspending, excessive risk aversion, what's happening is that's a response. That's probably a trauma response or a response to something in the environment. It's a response and a behavior that's disrupting them. It's not something's wrong only with them. So we kind of go back and forth between money disruptions or money defenses. And that just felt like much less shaming to approach it in that way. And another thing I'll say about language is, we feel in trauma of money, it's important to be like very curious with the words we use and allow ourselves to like continue to refine that. I don't know, maybe in like 10 years, we'll say a different word than disruption, but I do like the openness to be curious, to explore like what word, what language is serving my journey the best. And when I say my journey, of course, this is like my journey rooted it within the collective.
Yeah. Well, and I think again, how you talk about this was just a game changer for me, because oftentimes too, we have this disorder and we just associate it like compulsive, like you said, shopping or gambling, excessive risk taking. But there's also the other side of this, which I've also seen and experienced, which is true in some communities. And especially again, if what the goal is to enhance everyone's sense of well-being with financial resources, and in part, release some of those resources in service of others, when you challenge why you're holding so tightly, or why, the aspirate you have, there's never enough, is actually not true, because there is enough. There's such a thing as enough. There's a financial equation to having enough. But you talk about also some of those behaviors, but also ones like, which I appreciated, under earning or financial rejection or financial denial. So these are ones where, and I know people who do this, who have more money than God in some ways, and yet, just clip coupons incessantly, or don't use their money, or the underspend category. So again, we only have a few minutes, but some of them, I'm just going to name: financial denial, financial rejection, under earning, underspending, overspending, compulsive spending, hoarding. Like, there are all these words, and I don't mean to just pop them into buckets, but they're so nuanced. And if you had to pick one that is the surprise one that often shows up, that people were like, whoa, I never thought about that as a money disruption, what would it be?
I think the one that we see a lot is financial rejection. And that's where there's like a subconscious rejection of like financial flourishing. And it can show up in multiple ways. Like, one of them is conflating money with being bad, or like if you have money, you're like greedy and an oppressor. And so you might like reject opportunities, or it might create a lot of paralysis on like how you use your wealth, because you're so afraid of like being the oppressor. So I think that financial rejection is one. And then the other one is financial fawning.
Yes, I wanted to get to that because you actually coined this term, and I was like,
Yeah.
another one of those moments. So explain what that is, Chantel, and how it came to be for you as naming it.
Yeah. So fawning is a trauma response where we essentially people please. And financial fawning is where we will abandon ourselves in order to avoid someone or something else abandoning us. And we can do this multiple ways with money. So overspending on others when we might not be able to have the resources to do it, overgiving, under earning because you're afraid to like negotiate a raise, you're afraid to like increase your prices, lack of boundaries around money. So maybe you end up getting in a situation where you've taken a lot of like risk with an investment or something because you didn't feel confident enough to like ask the questions and do more due diligence because you didn't want to offend the financial expert, right? And then it can also show up in workaholism and financial avoidance as well. So the thing about financial fawners, when you're caretaking everyone, at the end of the day, you are exhausted. And so you are not going to do your taxes on time. You're not going to take care of your 6-step skincare routine. Like you're just exhausted from caretaking everyone and shape shifting and being in that like hyper vigilant state. So this is a big one that we see with identities who have been systemically marginalized.
Yeah, and I think the under-earning piece, and we've had a lot of workshops around women and negotiating, and this idea of asking for what you want, which is can often be you have to ask someone for more. So even that experience, if you experienced other forms of trauma with a certain type of person, how that shows up and the power dynamics around, like it's just once you see it, it's the blessing and the curse. You see it everywhere. And to pull it back in this last couple of minutes about the importance of this book and this book now, and I was so excited when you said you were pausing to really work on this book, is that it's going to be accessible to everyone. And I think, is this the first kind of preview book talk that you've given about this book, or is this like,
It is.
yay? Okay,
Yeah.
you're having it first with me. I wish I had cake and we'd have it virtually. But this is going to be a big book because it's going to change lives. It is absolutely going to change lives. And I'm coming back to my prediction at the beginning that it's going to be challenging to the field. And it's going to be one of those books now that we have it. You can't imagine the field without it. And I mean both the fields of psychology and how you support people from a mental health perspective and in the world of money and finance. It is it's filling this gap between those two worlds, which is why I'm so excited about it. So I'm going to have, obviously, you can pre-order the book. It's coming out. Is it September 23rd, Chantel?
Yeah, you can pre-order it now, but it'll be officially like in stores September 23rd and it'll be shipping on September 23rd.
Yes, and it matters so much to order it now for lots of lists and bestseller lists. So please buy the book, encourage other people. So the number of independent people buying the book really matters. We are also doing, as a reminder, partnering with Chantel and a lot of different offerings. So we'll put that up as well, and reach out to me, to Chantel, to She Money to learn more about those offerings. And I'll just in closing, I will ask you this question, Chantel, with so much gratitude. What are your hopes? I mean, you've been in this now. This is your life's work. But if you had to imagine what this book does, like your hopes for this book and sort of coming out, because you've been teaching this course for a long time, you've done a lot of work with different communities, but now you have, which will be a best-selling book in the field that's revolutionizing, that's filling the gap. So we're manifesting that right now together. But what is your hope and dream for this book and where you personally want to take yourself in this work?
Yeah. I mean, I have like more concrete goals of where I'd like to see this work, but I think the essence of what I want to see is I want people to engage in this work and read this book and come out of it believing that they can be trusted with money. Especially if you carry financial shame, that's usually an indicator that you carry a lot of empathy. And that means we need to get more money in your hands so you can do good things with it. And that, I believe, the more people that have shame, the more people that like question the economic system, the way things are done, the more money you have, the more close we'll get to closing the gender wealth gap, to closing the racial wealth gap. So what I really want is I want those folks to believe they can be trusted with money.
Oh, I love that. And I
Yeah.
also, let me just put this too. I hope the people that have the most and think that this book isn't for them, meaning rich men. I hope rich women too. I mean, everybody, but the people that have the most for them to see this because, and because again, we need the world to be more generous. We need the world to be, people in the world to be well, to be healthy, to be able to pursue economic and financial opportunity, do it in the right way for them. And again, how this is so integral to everyone's wellness is what we talk about all the time here at She Money. So we're going to close right on time. If we didn't get to your question, will it be on Spotify? How can you access the book? We'll be posting on all of that. And Chantel, we are alongside you in this launch. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. If you're watching this and you liked it, please share it. And please, one more time, we'll throw it up. Buy The Trauma of Money, pre-order now. And Chantel, love you so much. And thank you for writing this book.
So much. Thank you so much for everything you do at She Money. I'm so grateful to be in collaboration with you and your team.
Thank you, Chantel. And thanks to my team for helping out today. All the best.